Collage video. This approach to photo and video editing in Procreate Dreams is based on an animated style I've seen in a lot of school-related kinds of shows, but in particular, the final credits of Spider-Man Far From Home. And I think it's because it references physical memorabilia, a vintage feel, nostalgia for the past, has a bit of a documentary or editorial approach to it. I really like this style, and I think it can feel fresh and engaging if for no other reason than you're making inanimate materials appear alive, but you're also keeping a lot of their physical qualities, like shading, such as shading, or weird details that would just get lost if you were doing drawings. In general, I think collage is a cool personal style with a lot of handicraft apparent, but keeping a lot of their qualities, such as if you took a photograph of a physical object and it was shaded in one direction, but you wanted to transform and rotate this around in your video, that shading would stay consistent with the original photograph, not with the reality of your video, and I think that's kind of cool. It's kind of a trippy effect that people don't think about. In general, I think collage is a cool personal style with a lot of handcraft apparent in the final product. So for our collage animation, we wanted to create some sort of advertisement for Valentine's Day, just something cool to really stand out against everything else that was going to be on social media at the time. And when you're trying to communicate directly to people and you have about 3 to 5 seconds to catch their interest, the most simple design is best, even when you're doing something that's collage-y. Collage tends to get very cluttered. So keeping it simple, it's going to be a figure and it's going to be a background that has a texture reminiscent of construction paper. And I wanted to make use of the energy effects within Procreate and Procreate Dreams, so clouds and fire. The photographs of the figure I had taken individually and done cutouts in Photoshop. Very easy to do cutouts in a number of applications, Photoshop just being my preference because I've used it for decades. So dealing with the photographs, we shot a couple positions where one would have a bow and arrow for Cupid and faces. I layered them in Photoshop and did cutouts. It's very easy to layer within regular Procreate and do cutouts. We address this in our lesson on compositing, but just know that you can either automatically select a background and remove it in any number of applications, including regular Procreate, or use an eraser tool to wipe out elements of a photograph that you don't need in Procreate Dreams and in regular Procreate. Because I had these as a Photoshop file, you can see all layers turned on. It's an arm up, an arm down, and a different head. And then the arrow itself, I took a photo with my phone and just included it because it needs to separate from the bow at some point. And when she fires this arrow, it's going to need to be drawn back on a string, so I did not need the string as part of my photograph. I'll draw the string in as needed. If you import a photograph directly into Procreate Dreams, it is not going to have the layers separated, and there is no way currently to separate those layers. If you import something that has layers into regular Procreate, so a Photoshop file with these different iterations of my Cupid, I have access to those layers in regular Procreate, and I can simply take that photo, split screen between Procreate Dreams and regular Procreate, drag it over into my movie in Procreate Dreams. All right, so step one, I have dragged my collage set of images over to Procreate Dreams. I'm going to find the background, simple construction paper look. And the reason why I'm going for construction paper specifically is because it evokes the kind of homemade Valentine's Day crafts that we used to do when I was a kid. I'm going to illustrate some clouds, and I'm going to do these as frame by frame animation because I want these clouds to move and have a different sort of life to them. I'm not going to do every single frame of cloud animation. I'm just going to do as many as I feel is necessary to stay interesting. I'm going to group them, copy them, and then loop the groups. I'm also going to group the cloud layers with my photograph because this is the part where I want to get the timing down right for where I'm going to put my cuts on where these photos change. So with the clouds and Cupid in a group, I'm going to do some transformation across the timeline, move them in and out, and I'm going to do this using something called the record button. This is where you do performance capture. The record button is the square next to the play. I'll go ahead and start my animation off the page, and then with the record button turned on, float it in with a little bit of a bounce, the way that I imagine somebody riding a cloud would have. I think I got this idea from the old Super Mario Brothers game. When we do playback on this, you'll see that it has a very natural kind of flow to it when you use performance performance capture. Not great for every single thing you might want to do in animation, but certainly pretty good for this particular one. Now that I know where my character is positioned, I can start making cuts to where one pose ends and another begins. So to do this, I need to break apart my photo track into its individual layers. It's a long press on the track. You also have an option that says convert photos to layers. Now, you won't have this option if you import something like a Photoshop file that has layers directly into Procreate Dreams. You do have to go through regular Procreate, have access to the layers there, and then drag that file over to Procreate Dreams. That's where you'll see this convert layers into tracks menu. Having done that, I can place incisions with the edit menu. That's a long press on the playhead where you see edit, and you can start cutting your photographs to where you want them to fit. So this pose needs to end here, and this pose needs to start here. And this is where I can also delete the remaining parts that I don't need with a long press on those parts of the tracks. The arrow needs to change position. So what I'm going to do is have an arrow that conforms to one pose and an arrow that conforms to another. Once again, I split those tracks, so I have two separate arrows, and now it's just a matter of repositioning them. This one that is aiming at a 45-degree angle is the one that's going to be set loose and fly. And to create a little bit of verisimilitude, meaning reality for that, I'm going to draw in the lines of the bow that are stretched. And it's going to be just a briefest split second on screen, but that stretched bowstring, I do want that to conform to the arrow as it's being released. It's got to push it forward. I plan on putting a sound effect with it, and it's going to be really cool in my brain. So just a matter of drawing some straight lines as the arrow will fly off. Now, having the arrow fly is not going to be a performance capture because I don't want it to go all over the place in sort of an organic form like the clouds. I want it to go in a straight line. So to get a straight line motion as I do my transform, as I reposition where the arrow is, I hold my screen with one finger, and this allows for snapping, meaning it's going to transform in a single direction rather than in a direction that goes up, down, side, side, anything that doesn't conform to the snapped line. The final elements of this, I'm going to fade in some speed lines. These are simply loops drawn on their own layer. Again, it's kind of the same thing as the clouds. I'll draw as many as I think I need, maybe 5 to 10 iterations of something, and then I'll simply group them, copy, paste, and loop it. For them to fade in, I simply use opacity filter, set opacity to 0 at the beginning, and then very quickly get it to 100% or whatever level you think is appropriate for what you're doing. I originally hadn't thought about having fire at the end of the arrow, but it just seemed to me that adding to the silliness of this premise was worthwhile. So I drew in some fire loops, including a spark where the fire would ignite as something travels through the atmosphere. You can imagine it heating up and having that spark where it just bursts into flames. And that's what we have here. My fire is a combination of some of the luminance brushes that come with Procreate and some fire brushes that I downloaded. Oftentimes, I find these brushes are a little bit too sharp, so you can use the smudge tool, which is the thing that looks like a finger attached to a hand in your drawing menu, or you can use the filter that is Gaussian blur within your playhead effects menu. If you enjoyed this tutorial, check out my full Procreate Dreams courses in the links below. Best of luck in your own creative endeavors.